The deed is done. The king is dead. The noble head overthrown. Murdered in the meanest man. Alright. Heirs to the Throne. It's an old strategy game from the early 90s. This is the copy from when I was a kid. Kinda looks like someone barfed on the manual a bit. I'd forgotten about this game until I went dumpster diving through some old stuff stashed away with my parents a while back. I imagine it'd work fine in DOSBox, but I've got this old 486 from Gateway that I've upgraded a bit, so let's use that instead. The upgrades that matter here are the Sound Blaster Pro 2.0 and the CD drive, which is just used for installation. Alright, let's see what we're working with. Looks like we probably just do a CD inst and run setup. VGA in English looks good. Sweet, let's play. Well, that sucks. You know, I didn't even get the option to set up any kind of sound, which is kind of odd. Long story short, I narrowed down the issue to the game not liking EMM386, or at least not liking how I was using it. The manual also claims it needs 570K of regular memory to run, which seems to not be the case, but I've freed it up anyway. Running old games in their native environments is kind of like being in a hostage situation. You can choose to fight, but your best bet is probably to play along until you can escape. I shouldn't have to say this, but to be clear, that's not real advice. I've never been in a hostage situation, unless you count my massive student loan debt. Still, we're not getting any sound. This isn't mentioned in the manual, but there's a separate sound setup program other than, setup. There we go, everything's auto-detected fine based on my DOS config settings anyway. From what I can tell, the game doesn't have any sound effects, but hey, this intro music's not bad on a real OPL3 chip. And the static images look pretty good, except the jagged cutout around the edges. That looks like the kind of Photoshop job I'd do. So the story is that the king was murdered and now the throne is up for grabs. There's a legitimate heir out there fighting in the Crusades, but the power vacuum has left an opening for the local barons to seize control. We play as one of those barons.
Are we the baddies?
Well, maybe. For all we know, the king had it coming and his heir is a dick. It's barely worth mentioning, but the game does have some very light fantasy elements, but ultimately really has no effect on the gameplay. Apparently, this land used to be inhabited by orcs, though. Before we can start a new game, we have to go through an absolute ton of game settings. There's 6 pages of these. I'm just gonna leave everything on default. Put in a cool name, select a color, and hey, check out these banners. Some of these are pretty sweet. This one kind of reminds me of Torm, I think, from Forgotten Realms, but I always went with this one as a kid.
They've got skulls on them.
Yeah, I guess that removes any doubt. We are the baddies after all. This music's awfully cheery considering the tone for the rest of the game. You know, in retrospect, since I always picked the Red Baron, I feel like this was a missed opportunity to name myself Pepperoni and choose the pizza flag. Alright, now we can choose a map. These are all randomly generated. So this is a roguelike, I hear you say. No. Stop. This game has randomly generated maps, yes, but it's nothing like Rogue. Come on. Anyway, you can keep generating maps until you find one you like. There's also a legend you can use as a reminder for what different terrain types look like. More on terrain later. Now it's time to select a home province. It seems like somewhere in the corner is probably good. If you lose your main province, I'm pretty sure the game is over, so you want to protect it. Okay, we should be good to... right, the copy protection. Thankfully, I still have the manual, but I'm not sure this is easy to find a scan of online. Well, I did y'all a favor and I made one. You can find it in the usual places. By the way, you only get 3 shots at answering the copy protection question before you kick back to DOS. We've done it! We can finally start playing. So the flow of the game goes like this. You've got multiple phases per turn and then the AI does its thing. First up, you get paid, and then you get to pick somewhere to attack. but you can only attack adjacent provinces where you have troops stationed, and only once per turn per province. After you're done attacking, you can move your troops around. It's a little bit like Risk. After moving troops, you can spend gold on building villages for more income, fortifications for better defense, or recruiting new soldiers. After every round, you get a report showing how the players stack up. Seems pretty straightforward, right? Wrong! This is a game for math nerds and people who live their life by spreadsheet. You'll see. So I'm going along and it seems like things are going pretty well. I've got some territory, built a few villages, got a decent army. With the default settings, I can't see what's happening beyond my borders aside from the AI fighting the Royalists, which are basically just a neutral faction to provide some resistance before meeting the other players. Before I know it, the Green Baron is on my doorstep. This is a problem. While the Royalists won't ever go on the offensive, he will. And the AI knows with pinpoint accuracy how many troops it needs to leave in a province to thwart any hope you have of making a successful attack. It also knows when it can't successfully defend, and will always pull back in an unwinnable situation. You can attack a province with troops from multiple adjacent provinces, but if I take this one next to him, I'll just have to defend twice as much territory with the same amount of troops. Now we should talk about the terrain. On the default settings, terrain affects the income from villages and the fighting power of your soldiers when you're attacked. I had the superior defensive position being in the mountains, but as soon as I leave to attack, he's got a lesser, but still superior defensive position in the forest, compared to my attacking strength. That means I need overwhelming force to win, which I don't have. On top of that, any soldiers you buy start in your home province, but there's no way to move them on the turn you get them. In other words, most of the time, new troops probably won't be useful for offense until 2 turns after you buy them, so defenders pretty much always have time to prepare. The only thing I can do now is get into an arms race with him and try to build up my territory that isn't under threat. Oh, and don't forget, there's a third player too, the Grey Baron. While Green and I were having our standoff, Grey has been taking territory, and now he's on my doorstep too. This is how I remember the game going as a kid. Eventually getting into a standoff and being unable to build up enough economy to break out of it. The end of turn report kinda says it all. There are a couple random events here and there after a few months, both good and bad, but it's nothing game-changing. Before long, I lose my patience with the stalemate, and yep, that's a familiar scene. This game is as unforgiving as I remember. Look, I'm no master of strategy, so there are probably things I could have done differently, but we should go back and take a look at a couple of those game settings. The default ones can be pretty tough, and the manual has some recommendations for various levels of difficulty. Here are some of the more important changes I'm making for a new game. First up, I'm going to increase the number of villages per province. That should make it easier to corner camp, at least in the early stages of the game. I'm also going to make it so I can see the whole map. That way I can keep tabs on who's taken what territory. Allowing catapults theoretically makes it easier to attack fortified provinces, and I'm turning off the terrain effect for combat. One of the biggest changes is the addition of another AI opponent, to hopefully keep the third player in check. Alright, let's see how this goes. Damn it, I failed the copy protection. You tell me, what would you have picked for page 24, paragraph 4, line 2, word 1? Because I sure got it wrong. Thankfully, you can save your game settings and reload them next time you play. This time I've got a solid position. Grassland is great for village income, and there's an entire province locked off behind me. As expected, increasing the village count per province makes it possible to do more with less, and it seems like my plan of adding another player is working out well to keep the other Baron in check while I face off against Green again. Hey, I even got promoted to Earl. Though I'm not sure if the new titles actually do anything. I'm able to build up enough of an advantage to go around the main front and flank Green's weaker territory. Still, we're in a stalemate again. I had to save scum a few attacks on Green's main province because I set the fortification level for those provinces to the max. I'm not sure that was a great choice because even with the terrain effect on combat disabled and catapults enabled, the fortifications make a big difference. We should talk a little bit more about the combat. The presentation is kind of unremarkable. You get a couple bars on the sides of the screen, the red one representing relative troop strength, and the green one representing relative fighting power. The backgrounds look nice, I guess, and really I would say the graphics are pretty decent all around, but there's not much strategy here, unfortunately. You can just click the attack or retreat button and watch the bars move. This feels more like watching the news than actual gameplay. In general, if you're fighting someone with a higher green bar, you're going to be in for some hurt. There is a random element to the combat, but it seems like most of it is already decided by the spreadsheets. Like I mentioned, even though the terrain effect on combat is disabled, fortifications still matter, as do catapults, and honestly, I can't be bothered to do the math to figure out how many troops I actually need to have a good chance of taking a heavily fortified province. And this is with homogeneous soldier types. Yeah, we haven't even gone down that rabbit hole yet. Somehow I managed to bait Green out of his home province with most of his army, which allowed me to swoop in for the kill. The AI doesn't typically make mistakes, so maybe I just got lucky in the combat? Turns out, when you take an enemy home province, that's it. You get all their territory and all their soldiers defect to your side. Not bad. Even though the Blue Baron has been on my doorstep for quite a while, he hasn't been able to commit enough troops to take me on, thanks to his own stalemate with Grey. At this point, it's just a matter of time before I snowball enough to win. There aren't any formal alliances in this game, so Blue and Grey can't attack me together. If I were playing against human opponents, that might be a bit of a different story. By the end of the game, I'm getting thousands of troops per turn. Blue goes down first, followed by Grey shortly after. At this point, I definitely think max level fortifications for home provinces isn't the way to go. It just prolonged the inevitable. But hey, that's it. I'm the king. I'm really not sure, but this might be the first time I've ever actually won a game of Heirs to the Throne. You might think that's it, but actually there are 2 or 3 more big wrinkles we can throw into the mix with the options. Let's start up one more game. I already briefly mentioned one of the changes: different soldier types. Another change is having the max number of villages in a province be tied to the actual size of the province. Oh, and remember, the king had an heir out fighting in the Crusades. If we turn the royalists to hostile, he's coming home, and he ain't gonna be happy when he gets here. Just for good measure, let's turn the terrain effect on combat back on, and since I turned off random events last time, we'll turn those back on too. I'm also gonna lower the fortification level for home provinces a bit. We could also turn on supplies required for soldiers, but according to the manual, that only affects players, so screw that. Okay, let's see what we got. I cannot imagine this is gonna go well. Seems like we might have a shot on this map. There's a nice little nook to start out in. However, the other barons start out surprisingly close to me this time. In fact, I'm within striking distance of the Green Baron's home province by round 2. While I'm able to secure some territory, the max villages setting we tweaked starts to rear its head. I'm holding my own in a stalemate, but Green is starting to pull ahead. Armies are a bit more complex now with the different troop types. Yeah, there's another spreadsheet that shows which troops are the best for what scenarios.
Read this 800-page educational pamphlet.
But it didn't really have much effect on my decision making. I was playing defensively most of the game, so I pretty much stuck with, infantry and bowmen the whole game, since it seemed like they're the best for that. I tried attacking a superior force once by using cavalry, which are supposed to be good in non-fortified areas, but I still lost and save scummed out of it. As far as I know, there's no way to see what troop composition the AI is using, but I guess it's also possible that this is another player-only feature like supplies. Ultimately, none of it matters though. After a few years, you get 1 month's notice that the king's brother is coming back from the Crusades. The next round, he shows up with over 17,000 troops. With the royalist troops that are still on the map, that's about 3 times as much as all 4 barons combined. The heirs troops are spread out evenly initially, but it doesn't matter. We barons spent too much time squabbling amongst ourselves in our bid for power, and now we're screwed. Blue goes down, then gray, then green. I'm all that's left, sitting in my citadel with a measly 2,600 troops against almost 16,000. Not even defensive catapults and a favorable army composition can get me out of this one. I remember the air being pretty much impossible, so that went about as I expected. It's probably for the best, since it's pretty clear we were the bad guys anyway. You do get a different ending if you lose to the air though, which is cool. Anyway, that's Heirs to the Throne. A bit of an obscure game from my childhood that you don't hear much about these days, at least at the time I'm documenting this playthrough. For a game that seems so simple on the surface, it has a surprising amount of depth, thanks to a huge amount of options that let you customize how you want to play the game. I'm glad I came back to it, and even though the king's brother sits on the throne for now, I'm sure I'll come back to it again in the future, to make another run at seizing power. Stay tuned for the next one. After all, there's always something else in the Neverchive. No, 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 nope, nah, no, no, yeah.